Welcome to Recovery with Root, a podcast centered on topics surrounding mental health and addiction. Through our Advanced Recovery Institute, a new entity of the Root Center for Advanced Recovery, we are committed to research and training to elevate clinical care. We hope you find this podcast informative, and most of all, we hope that it helps improve the lives of others. Remember, we're in this together, and recovery is possible. Welcome back to another episode of Recovery with Root. I'm Margot Farrell, Chief of Staff here at the Root Center for Advanced Recovery. It is Gambling Awareness Month, and today we are joined by Allison Pons, Director of Operations here at the Root Center, and Brian Hatch from the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling. Guys, welcome to our show.
Thank you.
So you guys have a lot of experience in the world of gambling. I know, Brian, you are very open about your own lived experiences, and Allison, you've had a lot of experience in the working world with different groups at different organizations. So I guess, Brian, we'll start with you and give us a little background on your own lived experiences and what you feel comfortable sharing today.
Sure. My addiction took place when I was 18, but my gambling started when I was 5. My grandfather showed me how to play poker, and he made me pay up. And he made me pay up often because he was my grandfather and I was 5 and he won. And then when I was 12, I bought a bunch of pull tabs at my church. My church had like a fundraising festival, and they were selling these pull tabs. And pull tabs are just mechanical scratch-off tickets. And they were selling those to kids for some reason, for some unknown reason. And I bought a whole bunch with my money, and I ran out of money. And I went to my parents' car, and I stole all the money out of their car, and I bought more. So at 12, I was stealing money to gamble. And then 16, 17, played a lot of cards with my friends, lost a lot of money on ping pong to my friends. But then when I was 18, freshman in college, I'm from Michigan, and I went to Eastern Michigan University. And within a month, some friends from high school called and said, hey, there's a casino we can all go to at 18 and play blackjack. So I was like, oh, cool, let's go play blackjack. So we all met up at this casino. It was a 5-hour round trip for me. And we played, and I won that night. I won $150, and I was like, this is more money than I'm going to make at work the next day. So then something clicked, and I returned back a few days later by myself, and a few days after that, and a few days after that, and so on. And that's how my freshman year continued until the end when they said, you haven't been going to class, you are kicked out. And so I got kicked out, essentially for gambling, because that's what I was doing, but academically dismissed.
Wow. And so when you look back, at what point do you think you realized, okay, this is problematic?
I knew 3 months in that I had an addiction. I called the helpline 3 months in that existed in Michigan at the time, but I didn't say, hey, I need help. I called and said, hey, I'm writing a paper about gambling addiction. Will you send me some information? Because I didn't want to admit that I had if I say it out loud, that means I have to go get help. And I didn't want to get help. I wanted to gamble. So they sent me a bunch of information. Some of that information was the 20 questions that you would get asked at a Gamblers Anonymous meeting. And those 20 questions, they say that if you answer yes to 7 or more of those, then you probably have a gambling problem. And I answered yes to, 15, 16 at the time. Mm-hmm. So I was like, oh, yeah, I'm addicted. So I knew 3 months in, but I was 18. I was like, I'm too young to have an addiction. And so I kept going.
Yeah, and I know you're very open about it. You have your own podcast that you talk about gambling in many different facets, your own story included. When you think back, and we were kind of chatting a little bit before the show, the age is what struck me. And you're saying now that's becoming more typical. We're seeing more kids really, and kids and young adults who are getting involved, who are also getting involved in the meeting space as well.
Yeah, the availability on the phone really gets it to everybody. But I think kids are being advertised to more than they used to be. The advertising when I was gambling was all the casino gambling, those commercials where it's everybody dressed fancy, having a great time on a Friday night. And that was never my experience. I never saw those happy people there at the casino. I just saw other people just relentlessly pushing a button on a slot machine and chain smoking cigarettes. But these days it just seems like it's advertised more to kids. And, when Alice and I were working together at a previous place, we saw a lot of college-age kids who all had these group chats where they would put their bets in their group chat to share with their friend group. Mm-hmm. And so, college kids in general, Greek life has poker nights. They do lots of different gambling events. So it's just ingrained in the behavior of people. Gambling is risky behavior, and college kids do risky behavior.
Mm. And when you hear Brian's story, Allison, and with your expertise in gambling and overseeing kind of problem gambling groups. How typical is his story as to what you see on a daily basis?
I would say it's pretty typical. About 49% of individuals who have a mental health or substance use disorder also have a co occurring gambling addiction that they might not have yet sought treatment for.
And that's pretty common too sometimes when folks, when you hear of the Root Center or you hear about the work we do, we talk a lot about substances. And so folks may hear addiction and they're thinking alcohol or a drug of some sort. And gambling may not come to mind, but there's also a lot of statistics that point to sometimes when folks have previously used a substance and then they stop using that substance, they look somewhere else to fill that void. And gambling tends to be a really prevalent thing that people gravitate towards. Mm-hmm. How have you seen that in the recovery sphere kind of impact folks? Because maybe they were able to stop their use of alcohol or stop their use of drugs, but now there's this other thing, and it's a little bit harder to pinpoint.
And I think that's because it's not talked about. There's a lot of stigma around gambling and gambling related harm. And so here we're really trying to integrate problem gambling services into our current services by providing assessments, interventions early on so that we can address everything as a whole and not just the mental health and substance use piece.
Yeah, because we just started a couple months ago at Root Center Problem Gambling. So we're based in Manchester, but anybody can attend virtually. What are some things that group, if you were to attend that group, what can you expect? And what does that kind of recovery process look like?
Yeah, so in addition to the weekly group, we also offer individualized treatment on an individual basis. And it's really a space to identify triggers, healthy coping strategies, figuring out and learning the impact that gambling is having on your mental health, your substance use in all areas of life. We want to take that whole person approach to recovery.
And Brian, now at this point in your recovery, how many years has it been, and what does your recovery look like on a day-to-day basis today?
It's been 10 and a half years since I placed a bet. Day to day, my podcast is my recovery tool. It always has been. That's how I was able to stop, is just by constantly talking about my addiction. Because it keeps it right in front of me then, and I know where it is, and I don't have to worry that's going to sneak up and get me. So day to day, I go to recovery meetings once in a while, not on a consistent basis, but after 10 and a half years of talking about it, I'd have no desire to gamble. I did a conference in Vegas back in May, and that was 9 years and 10 months since I had gambled. In the last place I placed a bet was in Las Vegas. So I returned to the scene of the crime and walked into this casino where the conference was being held, and I just had this weird feeling of like, oh my gosh, I'm back in the casino. And then I was walking by all these machines I used to play, and I had cash in my pocket. And I was like, I could place a bet. Nobody would know. But I found that I just didn't want to. I had no desire to gamble. So I hung out in this casino and I was fine. I didn't want to gamble. I didn't want to put any money in any machines or on a table. I just was more fascinated by watching other people and their behaviors and just kind of seeing like, oh yeah, I used to do that. I used to do that. That was me. So it was a really powerful feeling to not want to gamble.
Well, talk about like really being faced head on with your trigger. For some people, of all places to be in, you're in the mecca of gambling there in Vegas. Did you ever think that there was a point in time that you would get to be at a place where you just don't even think about it or you have no desire to?
No. No. I still to this day, I love gambling. I'm not anti-gambling. I love it. I understand why people do it, but I know that I can't do it. And I have 14 years of evidence that tells me that. So but the not wanting to was surprising. Like I thought, well, I might want to, but I'm not gonna. But I just didn't want to. And so being able to, since that time, I've been in the casino 2 or 3 times for concerts. And just walking through the floor, I'm like, nope, don't want to gamble. Also, just want to get out of here really quickly because I don't want to overwhelm myself. But just not wanting to gamble, and I think it was all those years of harm and that lifestyle was so dirty. I was staying up all night long. I wasn't eating well. I wasn't taking care of myself. I didn't give a crap about anybody. I just wanted to gamble, and so it's nice to be away from that and to sort of have my mind back.
When we talk about, earlier we were saying that a lot of times we see like maybe someone gives up drinking or gives up a substance and maybe they do pick up gambling. Did you ever have any crossover with any substance use with it? Did you find that it opened the door for other things for you, or was it always just gambling?
I mean, I was a chain smoker when I gambled. I would always buy a pack of cigarettes before I would go to the casino because the casino cigarettes were more expensive. And I would, if I hit a bonus round, I'd light up a cigarette. Like there was a routine. And I would sit there and chain smoke. And then I wasn't a big smoker outside of the casino. I mean, once in a while at a bar or something. But smoking was mine. Drinking I didn't do because honestly, I didn't want to get up and go to the bathroom while I was gambling. And if I was drinking 3 beers, I'd have to do that. So I didn't want to do that. So I might have a drink when I get there, but that wasn't the reason I was there. I will say that sitting in a lot of GA rooms, Gamblers Anonymous rooms, I've heard plenty of people in those rooms say that they were cross addicted, substance use or alcohol, and gambling was the hardest one for them to stop. Mm. So I've heard that several times in these rooms, and I just you confuse it with fun. It's an addiction, but you're confusing it with this is a fun time.
And Allison, when you hear that, what do you think from a clinical perspective? Is that what you see too when you're in group?
Yeah, absolutely. Alcohol addiction and gambling addiction, there's definitely a big crossover between the two of them.
And in terms of the difficulty to stop, do you also kind of see that same trend that Brian's mentioning, that a lot of folks will say it's the hardest of their addictions to let go of?
Yeah, and I think part of that is, as Brian was saying earlier, the accessibility of it and it being everywhere with all of the advertisements.
Because it's like, when you think of certain substances, they're villainized and or it's illegal or this, but gambling is legal, and gambling is even advertised. It's like you wouldn't see necessarily any of the illegal drugs or the illicit substances that we treat folks for being advertised on a billboard. But just last night I was going to dinner and I was, I had this podcast on my mind, and I saw a DraftKings and it was saying like live bets right now. And I'm like, wow, that's, it's quite literally they're advertising something that for many people is the crux of their issue and really the demise of their well-being. How has that played into, the ease of it, into maybe the numbers that you're seeing, the amount of people who are seeking treatment, or just the amount of people who've been impacted?
I mean, now, especially with online gambling, you can bet on everything at any time.
What do you think about that, Brian, when you hear that? Like when you see where you were, and we were talking, like that wasn't necessarily when you first started, that wasn't the case for you. It was not as accessible. They didn't have the apps and all that. What do you think as you see it's almost like it's getting worse? Like there's more recovery options maybe, but the options to gamble are also more.
Oh, I've said many times now, like I don't know that I would have been able to stop if I was gambling now. On a phone, always with me? No, I don't know that I'd be stopping. So I'm glad that I never involved myself with online gambling because it's just so addictive. Mm-hmm. It's always, I mean, I'm already addicted to the phone. We all are. And so you throw something extra addictive onto that will reward me from time to time. I don't know that I'd be stopping. When I gambled, I needed gas money to get to the casino and back. I needed the 5 hours at the time round trip, and then eventually 2 hours and 45 minutes and stuff. So I needed time, and now you don't need time. That has been eliminated. When I would use up all the money I would go in with and inevitably go to the ATM in the casino, I had, you have to take that long walk where you're seeing people and you start thinking like, is this a good idea that I'm going to the ATM to take out more money? I have these bills to pay. But now that's eliminated. There's no more of that. You just press a button, a little plus button, and add more money, and there's no room for thought. So you don't have that time.
Yeah, you're not seeing the actual money.
And it's not illegal. That's it's almost encouraged too. It's like you don't have to drive somewhere. You don't have to go out of your house. You don't even have to move from where you are. As long as that phone's in your hand, you can do it. Mm-hmm. How do we fight back against that? How do we help the folks that may be susceptible to problem gambling when it just keeps getting easier? Like I know that's a loaded question. There might not be a clear-cut answer for that, but being in this world, what do you think are some things, like at least, or what do you tell the folks you work with? Because when I see that and I hear them, like it feels like it's just getting easier. Like at least substances are outlawed or illegal, or it's just a little bit different to, you have to go to a liquor store to get your alcohol. Like this is quite literally in the palm of your hand. Mm-hmm. What do you think, what are ways that we could combat that or fight against it? Or what is advice that you give to folks?
I would start with bringing awareness to it. Platforms like this, talking about it, sharing stories, lived experience, bringing to light gambling harm and what it's doing to not only the gambler, but also the community, the industry, and persons affected like family members.
I th- I think when I was getting addicted to gambling, I didn't. Gambling was not on my radar as an addiction. I wasn't like, oh, a gambling addiction. I've heard of that. It was more of like, what, a gambling addiction? What is that? Wait, that's a thing? And so I think that's a lot of people because gambling. Your producer Rosalie, who we were talking about earlier, gambling's so normalized in our society. This morning I was leaving the house and my daughter on her stack of papers from kindergarten was tonight's bingo night at her school. She's in kindergarten. So gambling's pretty normalized in our society, so I don't think people think of it as a harmful thing to do. They think of it as a bit of entertainment. But so when you get addicted and you've spent all your money that you're supposed to spend on bills, I think you start to think like, oh, there's something wrong with me. I'm not going to tell anybody because nobody else seems to be struggling with this. So I do think nowadays there's more people talking about it, so it is easier to identify the addiction.
But it is called the hidden addiction for a reason. Again, because for so long, and I think still it's not something that is talked about or that people recognize as an addiction, but it's important to note that gambling addiction has the highest rate of suicide out of all addictions.
Oh, I didn't. I would not have guessed that. I think a lot of people probably would not have guessed that. You see more common in men or women? Are you kind of split down the middle?
Gambling addiction in general? I think more men get reported, but I think there's plenty of women doing it. I just interviewed a woman on my podcast who emailed me on Sunday and said, I don't hear a lot of stories like this about me being a wife and a mother and having a raging addiction that I can't stop. Can I come on and share that? And I said, yes. And so she did. And she said, you just don't hear as much. It's all, the fancy thing these days is the 18 to 24-year-old kid who's playing, doing sports betting. And I don't think that is that accurate. I think it's everybody doing everything. When sports betting got legalized, that was the hot topic to talk about. But I think it's the online casino that came with it that's more harmful. Because even though you can do in-game betting now with sports betting and bet on, the coin flip and who's going to catch the first pass and is if the first pitch is a fastball or a curve, slot machines and online blackjack are still much faster than all of that. And so I think much more addictive. And I've heard, the clients that we saw that had used sports betting, it was once they kind of went over to that online casino and were playing online blackjack or online slots where they really did damage. So sports betting can be harmful, but I don't think it's as harmful as people make it out to be in comparison to the online casino.
And it's glamorized, to a certain extent, like you mentioned, the commercials that you see for casinos, everyone's dressed black tie and it's a fancy outing and it looks like a good time, everybody's smiling, but you're saying you don't too, when you were in that life or when you've gone back to the casino since, what you're seeing is a very different picture than what's being marketed out there. What is it? Paint the picture for what you see, what the true picture, I guess, for someone who's maybe not in that world and has only seen the commercials and the billboards, and it looks like, well, I guess it's a fun thing to do. You've lived that life and you've seen it for hours at a time. Paint that picture for someone who's never been around that.
In the commercial, it's well dressed, good looking people, and in real life, when I was there, it was me lifting my feet up at 4 a.m. for the vacuum person to that's not in the commercial, where someone has to vacuum under my feet because I won't get up because I'm still gambling. The lady with the oxygen tank sitting there next to her as she's piling her money in. The little bus that shows up with all the people, the older people from the old folks home who come and use their Social Security money on the casino. That's the accurate thing. Somebody sitting at a slot machine for 4 hours and not getting up and going to the bathroom. There's been reports online of people wearing diapers because they don't want to get up. So it's just highly addictive, and we all, put a circus up around it and call it a good show, and well, this is all entertainment, but it's addictive. It's walking into a house of heroin and being like, no, have fun, and not like, oh, be cautious. So it's strange the way that gambling's looked at as a behavioral addiction versus a chemical addiction.
And and I think to go off of that, another side of it is the person's affected and providing treatment to those individuals and seeing the broken families, the parents, the significant others, and the betrayal trauma that finding out about a gambling addiction does to them.
Well, and something in one of your podcast episodes that I heard that I thought was interesting, and as again I'm becoming more familiarized with this world, was the concept of not bailing someone out. Can you speak a little bit more on that when you're talking about the betrayal and the family aspect and stuff? Because you think of like a family member or someone wanting to help, but actually sometimes the help that has to be provided for someone who's in a gambling situation can be much, much worse to their detriment, really.
I told my parents about my gambling addiction around the age of 24. And I didn't tell them because I needed help and wanted to have a good cry. I told them because I needed money, because I was in financial ruin. So they bailed me out. And I understand why they did it. I asked them to do it. They helped me. But at the same time, that was just enabling me because it resets me to zero. And I'm like, oh, well, now I'm okay. And I could probably take another $200 out of the casino and control it this time. And so the same thing with, Gamblers Anonymous will tell you not to file bankruptcy because it's a bailout. I filed bankruptcy because I had no other option. And so I was like, I'll heed your advice, GA, but I need to do this. So I filed bankruptcy, and it was great because it was a red line in the sand I thought I'd never cross. And so once I did do that, the lawyer I had at the time was like, you can't gamble while you're filing bankruptcy because we need your records to show that you haven't been gambling. And I said, okay, and that's what did it for me. The lawyer saying don't gamble was what made me not gamble. And then once the bankruptcy went through, I was like, well, I never thought I'd file bankruptcy, and now that I have, I feel not great about it. So I think I'm done. And that was what did it for me. That was what my red line was, my rock bottom.
And you had talked about too, feeling good at a certain point in your recovery. And you're like, it felt good not to go to a meeting last week, so I didn't go this week. And then that felt good, so I didn't go the next week. How important is it to stay on top of it? Like, at what point, you said you don't go to as many meetings now, but you have a podcast that you're actively talking about it day in and day out. How important is it to stay up on it? Like, at what point, I think sometimes you maybe feel like, because you don't have those physiological symptoms as you would with a substance in your body and stuff. How does that work with the recovery process as to when people maybe start to feel a little bit more comfortable and they let their guard down a little bit?
I got complacent. 2.5 years in, I was like, oh, I haven't gambled in 2.5 years. I'm fine, is what I thought. And as soon as I stopped going to meetings, the interest in gambling picked right up. So again, it was keeping my addiction right in front of me, going to meetings. But then as soon as I didn't do that, I was like, well, I could probably gamble again. And that's how I had a recurrence.
And I've heard that a lot when working with patients as well, but I challenge that and tell them, by coming to therapy, by talking about it, it means it's working. So continuing that support and continuing down that recovery journey to maintain abstinence.
And when you do go to GA meetings now, what is kind of the spread of the folks that you see there? Do you see more people who are earlier on in their recovery, or is there a decent amount of folks who you're with who are many years, like yourself, 10 years down the line, who are still very much present at those meetings?
I think GA has always been a mix of that. You walk in and you see the guys who've been in there for 30 years, and then, there's those of us who just walked in, in the past 3 months. And inevitably, I think there's a stat, and it's like 90% or something of people who go to their first meeting don't go to their second meeting. There's a wild stat about people. It's so hard because it's so hard to get people to treatment or to GA. Like, they have to reach out and ask for help themselves. I got a call yesterday on the helpline, and somebody said, oh, I'm calling on behalf of someone else. What options are available? And I said, well, nothing is available unless they want the help, because they're not going to do it just because you tell them to. So somebody needs to want to get better in order to get help. But there's plenty of help out there. GA, Connecticut, we have the Better Choice Gambling Treatment Program, Dig In, GA, there's online support groups. Social media talks about it these days. There's a lot of people raising awareness. So there's a lot more avenues than there used to be. It used to be, 20 white dudes in a room talking, smoking cigarettes in the 50s, talking about their gambling on horses. And now it's a wide array of people sitting in a room, not smoking, talking about their phone apps that they can't get off of. So it's just wild how GA has sort of adapted and changed.
And Allison, you can speak to the different programs that you've been a part of, and now you've joined Root Center a few months ago after coming back from your internship and many years ago. And the landscape of recovery just continues to change. We started out primarily our main service line dispensing methadone, and now we have all these other avenues of recovery or different facets. What have you seen as being the biggest benefit to the way recovery has evolved?
By offering the different service lines and programs, again, we can take that person-centered approach to recovery and really address all of the behavioral health needs at one time.
What do you wish more people knew about gambling recovery, gambling addiction? What do you wish more people knew?
I wish people would pay attention to the fact that the house always wins. I mean, that is an expression for a reason, and it's because it's true. Those casinos weren't built out of losing. They were built on winning.
Yeah, knowing the odds.
But I just wish people knew that this is an addiction, just like substance use or alcohol use, right? And it can get out of hand very, very quickly. When Allison was talking earlier about the spouse, like you said specific trauma.
Betrayal trauma?
Betrayal trauma. I'd never heard that. And I was like, oh gosh, yeah, that feeling of the spouse who just finds out that their husband or wife just spent their bank account, hasn't paid the mortgage in 3 months, the 401k is gone. Oh, and by the way, I have an addiction, I need help. And, all of that at once is a lot to take. And so it's that person who really gets the brunt of the addiction. It's not the individual who's suffering because they knew the damage was happening. Mm-hmm. It's that surprise to the other person. And that money doesn't come back. I got a helpline call 2 months ago from a 21-year-old kid who called and very innocently said, I lost $2,500. Can I get that back? And I was like, oh buddy, no, that's not how it works. It's real. Like, you lost that money. This isn't a game. It's real life. And once that money's gone, it's not coming back. So be careful.
And I think the speed at which it can happen, like one of the stories you told was about losing $8,000 in the course of a couple days. And for some, it could be in a matter of moments.
Yeah.
It could be in a matter of literally seconds.
Yeah, having not graduated from college, I worked a lot of hourly jobs, and so $8,000 was a lot. But it was a loan that I took from my grandfather. I had lied to my grandfather, not lied. I said I want to go back to school, and I meant to go back to school, but the check came in the mail. He co-signed a loan for me. The check came in the mail, and when the check came, I called him. I said, "Hey, thank you. I got the check." And he called me and he said, "Hey, why don't you send that check back? I'll just give you the $4,000. That way you're not paying interest." And I said, that's a great idea. And he sent me the check, and I never sent the other one back, and I gambled the 2 checks away in 2 nights at the casino. And on top of it, had a panic attack and went to the ER and owed them another $2,000 because of not having insurance at the time. So it was expensive 2 nights.
So you also had physiological symptoms that were coming as a result as well. Like, we think about gambling as being, a game that you're playing, a game with very expensive risk, but you felt, and I remember that you said it was about $2,000. You went to the ER for a panic attack. You had very real physical symptoms that led you to believe there was an emergency happening.
Oh, I freaked out. I panicked so much after losing, because it was like the fog had lifted. I lost the $8,000 and I went, oh my God, what did I just do? I was supposed to go to school. I was supposed to send the other money back. My grandfather doesn't know. And then my grandfather ended up passing away. He never found out. And then it wasn't until we were cleaning out his apartment after he died. And it was my aunt and my mom are his 2 daughters. And they found an IOU note that he had written himself from me. And so that's how everybody else found out that I had a gambling addiction, was this IOU note that he wrote himself.
Oh, so it really, and it had a full-blown effect on your family then, I'm assuming. This went from the top down, because you also said you had worked for your uncle for a period of time as well.
Yeah, I got my uncle fired me because I was late all the time because I was gambling all night long. It's fun. Gambling has screwed my life up so many times it's that butterfly effect of gambling happened over here, and because of that, this other thing happened over here. I got stranded for 24 hours in Illinois one time because I rolled a stop sign, and in rolling that stop sign, the cop pulled me over, and I was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I was just in a hurry getting to work." And he said, "No problem. Just go here, go to the court, show them that you have your insurance," because I didn't have my insurance in the car with me. And so I said, "Okay, no problem." I didn't have it. I never paid for the insurance, so I didn't have it. I didn't pay for it because I'd gambled that money. And then I didn't pay the $25 ticket for rolling the stop sign. And so when I was in Illinois driving one night, I had a headlight out, and they pulled me over, and they said, "Oh, your license is suspended, all because of that stop sign incident." So they impounded the car in Illinois, and I was left carless in Illinois and wandering the streets for 24 hours in Illinois, all because I had gambled the money instead of paying a $25 bill. Like, it's these little things that just added up and kept compounding. And then when I got in trouble in Illinois and I had to go to court in Illinois because of getting the car impounded, I wrote a check for, it was like 600 and some dollars that I was fined. I put it in the mail, and because the check hadn't gotten there yet, I quickly gambled that money before they could pull it out of my account. So I had already gambled the money that I was meant to pay the fine with before they even received the check. So I mean, it was just a screwy time. Everything was gambling.
Do you feel like you were clear-headed? Like, did you have the awareness of what we were doing? Or, you speak about that brain fog. Or did it feel like we weren't really aware of what you were doing? Like, oh, I'll think about that later. Were you clear-headed, or you
Oh,
knew?
it was always punt till later. Every night that I was gambling, it was like, I'll worry about these bills tomorrow. And then tomorrow would come and be like, crap, what do I do? And it was, taking a payday loan or taking an advance off a credit card or something to
So I guess
fix it.
that's the interesting part too. Is so, let's say someone is struggling with substance use, they use, the next day they're starting to feel the withdrawal. That's why we understand there's a lot of reoccurrence that happens. Folks go to get rid of those sensations. What do you do in that moment when you have that awareness the next morning and you say, "Oh my gosh, this is what I did"? Because it's not like what can you do to make yourself feel better, take that pain away in that moment? What is kind of the next step when you would realize that? Would it make you inclined to go do it again? Or would that kind of have you be like, I need to stop for a bit?
My panic always took place on the way home. Once I went to bed and woke up, you wake up and you go, well, I'll probably go gamble again to try and get that money back and chase my losses. It was the way home. It's that drive home where the suicidal thoughts creep in. You're like, what am I going to do? I have no idea. I'm freaking out. You're texting people. You're calling people. That's when I'd worry. But once I fell asleep and woke up, it was kind of like, okay, I'll just ignore my phone while the bill collectors call, and I'll get paid in a few weeks, and it'll all work out.
So that thought that you can win it back is pretty common. That you.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. The chase.
That's what kept me going. Is I constantly thought the universe is not going to let me be hungry, but the universe didn't care. I was hungry a lot because of my gambling. You just keep, once you win once, it's like I hit a jackpot on a slot machine, and I'm convinced now that I can do that again. I'm like, well, it'll happen again. I've seen it happen, so it'll happen again. Or I doubled down and I got blackjack, and so I know that can happen again. But it doesn't always happen again. And
How do you address that in group, Allison? That thought of, if I just try harder, if I just do it one more time, if I just have a little bit more money, that next time I know it's going to work. How do you fight back against that?
Yeah, challenging those cognitive distortions and these illusions of control is so important because, like Brian was saying, you think that you can win again, and you think, okay, this happened to me, it's bound to happen again, or my machine is bound to hit, or there's a lot of superstitions, like I have to have the slot machine at the end of the row, or I have to go to the same dealer every time because that's the one that's going to make me win. But really, providing that psychoeducation, providing the odds and challenging those distortions to help increase the client's awareness that the house is bound to win.
What are some of those odds that you talk about? I know you mentioned some of the statistics that you've seen. Are there any other ones that you think just really blow you away when you hear them?
I always go to like the Powerball or the Mega Millions. The odds are 1 in 300 million chances somebody is going to win. You have a greater chance of being struck by lightning than you are to win that.
But even with that, I go, but I got a chance.
I was just gonna say, but you hear
that all the time. Like, well, what if I'm that one?
Well, it's that Dumb and Dumber line so you're saying there's a chance.
Yeah.
And then, to some respect, it's like, Well, you got to give credit for the positive attitude and the belief, but they have that conviction that they can win or they're going to be that one. And it's like, well, if you have that positive conviction that you could believe that, do you think that that's also deeply rooted in how you believe that you can overcome it and that you can recover? Because if you could believe that, surely you can believe in yourself too, right?
Yeah, but it usually takes a pretty big downfall to make that turn into recovery thoughts as opposed to winning thoughts. But
I was going to say another thing that we hear a lot of, when working with patients is that, well, they can't self-exclude or give up the casino because my favorite restaurant is there, or I need to go to the shopping center that's there. And again, challenging that, like, you can go to a steakhouse outside of the casino. You don't need to go to that one. You don't need to go to the outlets at this casino. You can go to it elsewhere. But, again, that's people are holding on to that. That's their reason for wanting to stay involved.
I never self-excluded because I was like, I'll do this down the road. I did go one time to downtown Detroit to self-exclude, and I just convinced myself, I was like, I can't find a parking space. I'll just go to the casino. And so I went down there to self-exclude, and I ended up going to gambling.
So you look for almost something that tells you, like a sign, like, oh, well, because I didn't find a parking spot, that means there'll be a parking spot there that I got to go to.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that usually it's that the point of like financial ruin, that's what it takes for people to then get them to the point where they're ready for recovery? Or what do you usually think is that determining factor, that aha moment that folks reach when they're finally ready?
I think it takes some big harmful event, whether that is, I think the financial harm is happening constantly with somebody who's gambling. No average person can gamble $1,000 a night, and many of us do. We find ways. But it's a major financial harm event. It's losing a house. It's getting a car repossessed. Most of the time, I think it's relationships, the threat of divorce.
Mm-hmm.
I think these are the big things that make people think. But even that doesn't stop people.
Right.
Because they still think, I'm going to win, and it's going to be okay. But at that point, that other person, that loved one, is like, it's not that you're losing money. It's that you're a different person.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to be around this monster that you've become.
And it goes through that betrayal trauma that
Right.
you were talking about.
And so even if the gambler isn't ready or interested in seeking treatment, I encourage persons affected and family members to seek their own treatment, to get their own support, because they're going through their own recovery as well after finding out about their loved one's gambling.
Well, and that was going to lead me to my next question. For someone who's listening right now and maybe, it's just starting to click for them, or they're maybe aware but they don't want to admit it, as you said earlier, what would your advice be? Speak to that person that's listening.
I tell somebody, tell anybody, tell a friend, a cousin, a coworker, just unburden yourself and let somebody else know. Because once you say it once you say, I have an addiction, I need help, like the highway starts going. You start moving down the highway and you start gravitating towards help. Because now you see like all the damage you've done and you go, oh, and the fog starts to clear and you start to think a little more clear-headed, where you can make decisions that aren't so rash.
The most courageous thing that anyone can do is to seek out help and to accept help. And while gambling is everywhere, recovery is also everywhere as well, and there are resources.
Love that. Recovery is everywhere as well. Anything that you want folks to know about the Connecticut Council and ways that they can assist and resources that are available?
The helpline in Connecticut is 888-789-7777. Depending on the day, you might get me. Depending on the day, you might get Val or someone else. But we are there. We have resources. We have the list of Gamblers Anonymous meetings in the area. We have the list of dig-in or better choice treatment programs that are available in the area. We have online support groups. We have a whole list of resources that can help people. And I think that's the main thing to call. And obviously, if you have a gambling addiction yourself or think you do and you call, it's, again, saying it out loud, going, I think I need help. And just kind of inching forward to help. And then once you find out that there's a whole community out there, it makes it so much easier.
I was just going to say, once you say it to one person, you realize, well, I've been there, or you see other people who have been there, and then suddenly that feeling of not being alone.
Yeah, that was huge. Because, mostly I gambled because I was alone. I had friends, but I just felt alone. And so that's why I would go to the casino, to be around people. I didn't want to talk to anybody there, but I just wanted people in my purview. I just wanted to see them. And so not being alone in recovery is a huge one, because it's so hard, because you can quickly turn the page like I did. Like stopped going to meetings 1 week, and then a few weeks later I'm going, well, I could probably gamble again. And if you have people around you, providing support and saying, no, I don't think you can gamble again, you go, oh yeah, right. I'm in recovery. I shouldn't do that. Mm-hmm. And so doing it with other people I think is the best way to go. And there's plenty of options for that in Connecticut.
And Allison, if you want to tell folks about the program here at Root and how they can get involved.
Yeah, so anybody can get involved. Again, they can be current patients of Root Center or outside of Root Center. Really, we want to be able to focus on integrating gambling into our current services. Again, through early screening, assessment, and intervention. So if anybody is interested, we have our weekly gambling group as well as individual therapy. And again, to reiterate, they'll get that whole person approach to recovery and not only address the gambling, but any other stressors they may be experiencing.
So good to know. And I love that component that you mentioned too about loved ones seeking treatment. And sometimes that could be what changes too, is you see the folks that maybe you've impacted and you realize, I do need to change, I do need some help. I really appreciate you guys coming on the show and spreading some awareness and, sharing your story. Brian, thank you so much. Allison, both wonderful. Thanks for your services and all that you do. And we'll be sure to have all of this in the comments section so folks can reach out if they need assistance.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of our podcast, Recovery with Root. As always, stay connected with us on social media to learn about when next podcast episodes will drop. You can comment, ask questions, even let us know about future topics that you'd like to see discussed. Until next time, remember, progress is the destination.